Hey, I'm Coach T. Welcome back to another Python Quick Code video. This is the third video in our list micro series, right? We're really spending our time trying to understand the basics of lists because it's a very powerful component in Python. It's got some advantages over other programming languages such as C# and Java and many languages that are statically typed because lists in Python can store multiple different types of objects. Not just single type lists like I have to sometimes struggle with in C#. So we're going to look at the insert method. We've already looked at the append method to add things to the ends of lists. And we've also looked at the pop method to remove things from lists either from the end or from a specified index. But in this video, which we'll get to in just a second, we're going to learn about inserting things into lists. And for that, we're going to need a couple of prerequisite skills to really understand what's going on here. First of all, you've got to be able to use for loops. If you don't know how to use a for loop in Python, I'd recommend going back and watching my video. It's one of my first, but it's also one of my best because I show you using a deck of cards how to think analogically about the for loop. And I think it's a good concrete lesson. If you are comfortable with for loops, we also need to understand how to declare a list, which we just did that about 3 weeks ago. Now I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. And also we need to understand how to call methods, which we have a video on that as well. So in this particular video, which is really designed for adult learners like myself, or maybe adolescents that don't have school resources to learn to learn computer programming, we're going to really just hone in on this insert method to understand what's going on and also some of the potential pitfalls that we could run into because of the zero-based index system. So that's another thing that you really do need to understand for this video is how does the computer count with the zero-based index system, because that can throw off what would otherwise be intuitive math. Now, I have covered the zero-based index system when I introduced lists and in the pop video. So if you haven't watched those, I'd recommend going back, but I will cover zero-based indexing in this video, but it's going to be brief. So let's do that first, and then we'll take a look at how the insert method works. So, oh, by the way, I'm Coach T. This channel is really for other adult learners and adolescent learners. I am not an expert in Python. I kind of consider myself an advanced beginner, but what I'm trying to do is give back to the community that got me computer programming by making other videos to help people get over the raw rocks. So if you do like that kind of practical head-first approach, subscribe to the channel or drop a comment for somebody else if you think you can help another learner. I'd appreciate that. But anyway, let's talk about zero-based indexing. When we count with our fingers, just as an object lesson here, we count with digits, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 fingers, we get to number 5. The computer does not count that way. Instead, it goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So even though we have 5 elements in our finger list here, we have an index on the last one is 4. It starts at 0, it ends at 4. So that can be very counterintuitive to the new learner who has to get their head around why is it pulling the wrong item out of my list when I'm doing some computation with lists. Generally, the big hang up is the zero-based indexing. So you've really got to get comfortable with that, which is why I recommend practice, practice, practice. 80% of your time should be practice. 20% of your time should be new learning. That way you have lots of time to build context and get comfortable with these concepts, which can be, like the zero-based index, kind of counterintuitive. That's okay. So when we're done with this video, again, I recommend you go build a list and start inserting, appending, popping, whatever. Get comfortable with this syntax. It's the only way you're really going to learn is through that practice. So with that out of the way, I talked for almost 4 minutes. Let me show you how to insert things into a list in Python. It's very simple. The big idea here is that insert allows us to insert items, not remove items, at a specified index. My bad. There are 2 components required for the insert method to work. The index at which you are inserting and the element you want to insert. So let's take a look at our list. we've got the Beatles, right? One of the most popular bands in history, and yet I know very little about them. We have John, Paul, Ringo, and George, right? Those are the big four. I'm not going to lie, I had to look it up. So we want to insert one of the previous Beatles. I knew there were other guys. I had to go look these guys up too, right? I want to insert Peter Sutcliffe. I want to insert him into the list because he was a Beatle. He deserves to be up there, right? I guess. And I'm specifying that I want him to be inserted at the the index number 1. So pause for a second, see if you can identify where Peter should be inserted. And what we're going to do is I am going to uncomment all of these while you think about it, and I talk over the thinking, making it very hard. We're going to set this up here. And now we have a for loop. So what should be happening is we have incrementer set at 0. We're going to insert Peter in at the 1 position. And then for each Beatle in the Beatles list, we're going to print off the number of that Beatle, the list number, starting at 0. And then we'll print their name. So let's run this. Okay, here we go. Oh, I hate it when it log jams me like that. So here we go. In our 0 position is John. Then in position 1 is Peter. So Peter ends up here, like this. Then Paul, Ringo, and George. That's kind of the ins and the outs of the insert method. It's very simple. We're always specifying at position 1. So if I were to add another one, like if I rewrite this very quickly and I say while true, add Beatle equals input, add a name to the Beatles, right? And then I say Beatles.insert, and we're always going to specify position 1, but we'll do add Beatle as our pass-in variable. And if add Beatle, just so we can break out of our loop, does not equal quit, then we'll add them, else break. And that will allow us to break out of our loop, right? So let's, we will delete that one and we'll rerun this program now, closing on my 8-minute countdown. So we're going to add a name to the Beatles. So in this case, we're always going to be inserting into position 1, which means that Paul should get shoved to the end of whatever we add here. So let's do Batman, Superman, Michael Jackson bought their music, right? Michael Jackson. We'll do, I don't know, Jimmy Carter. And we'll do Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Slayer. And then we'll quit. And so here you can see that every time I inserted something, it's getting added to that first position. Now, there is a side effect that you may not have anticipated. It's smushing down everything else because it keeps overwriting the first position. So whatever was behind it gets shoved farther down. Notice, Batman was first, but he gets shoved down. Superman replaced him in position 1. Michael Jackson replaced Superman. Jimmy Carter replaced Michael Jackson, and then eventually Abe Lincoln, Vampire Slayer, and President Extraordinaire replaces all of them. So you keep inserting down into the list. So my warning with the pop method was that we do need to be aware of how that zero-based indexing is counting and keeping track of where things are in the list because it's malleable or mutable. So sometimes it may not compute the way that you're expecting. So when you set up your lists, and I recommend that you go practice with setting up lists, be aware that things may not move around the way that you expect, just because it is counting in a kind of, to humans, counterintuitive manner. It is logical, it makes sense, but it's counterintuitive to how we might add things in, you know. So go practice. That's about all we need to say on the insert method, but go practice, Go get comfortable with this. If this video is 10 minutes long, go give yourself 40 minutes of practice playing with lists. And I think that'll set you up to work with tuples in our next video, which is a new type of collection and has its own quirks. So that's it. I'm Coach T. Consider subscribing to the channel if you like the head-first practical approach to learning Python, and I will see you next week.